Hello everybody and welcome back to Law and Court Cases. In today's video I'm going to be talking about a man who claimed to be born with the devil in him. Dubbed America's first serial killer, today we are talking about H.H. Holmes and his alleged murder castle. So without further ado, let's get into the video. H.H. Holmes is a name he would acquire later in his life. Holmes was actually born Herman Webster Mudgett on the 16th of May 1861 in New Hampshire. Holmes was the third child of Levi Horton Mudgett and Theodat Page Price, both of whom had descended from the first English settlers in the area. Holmes' parents were both devout Methodists. His father was from a farming family and at times he worked as a farmer, trader and house painter. He was also reportedly a heavy drinker who cruelly mistreated his family, beating his children and locking them in the attic. Holmes did not escape this volatile environment when he went to school either, as he was also faced bullying by his classmates due to his outstanding academic capabilities. These same classmates later discovered that Holmes was in fact terrified of the doctor's office. In one incident, he was forced to stand in front of a human skeleton and put the skeleton's hands on his face in an effort to frighten him. Initially terrified, Holmes later discovered the experience to be intriguing and claimed it helped him overcome his worries. Holmes subsequently developed an obsession with death as a result of the encounter and decided he wanted to become a doctor. However, even at this young age, Holmes was displaying disturbing pastimes as he started dissecting animals. Holmes developed courtly manners, a dapper wardrobe and a winning way with women. He graduated high school at 16 and got a job as a teacher in Alton, New Hampshire. There he met Clara Lovering, whose father represented the district in the New Hampshire state legislature. Clara was intensely attracted to Herman, but bothered by his insistence on sex. After courting for more than a year, they eloped on July 4, 1878. She gave birth to their son, Robert Lovering Mudgett, in 1880 in Ludden. By then, Holmes was tired of teaching and went to work as a clerk in a grocery store. For a year, he lived in Concord, where his wife lived with the parents in Glimmerton. He then decided he wanted to become a doctor. Clara agreed to support Herman through medical school. He enrolled in the University of Vermont medical program in Burlington, frequently visiting his young family. Clara supported him all while raising their young son. After a year, he transferred to the University of Michigan, a medical school that emphasized dissection. She joined him in Ann Arbor, but after a year, they decided that she's better off at home in New Hampshire. His Michigan professor recalled him as a rogue who breached his promise with a widow from St. Louis. He stole cadavers, mutilated them, and tried to collect insurance money by saying they died in an accident. During the summer of his junior year, he took a job as a traveling salesman for a book publisher in Northwest Illinois. He kept the proceeds and fell in love with Chicago. Holmes would graduate from university in 1884 and would move to Chicago in 1886. This is where he began to go by the name H.H. Holmes. Soon after his arrival, he came across a drugstore at the northwest corner of South Wallace Avenue and West 63rd Street in the Englewood section of Chicago. The drugstore's owner, Elizabeth Holton, gave Holmes a job. He proved to be a hard-working employee, eventually buying the store. On the contrary to several accounts, Holmes did not kill Dr. E.S. Holton. Holmes purchased an empty lot across the street, where construction began in 1887 for a two-storey mixed-use building, with apartments on the second floor and retail spaces, including a new drugstore on the first. In October of 1888, Holmes visited Clara and Robert at home and told them he had business in Chicago and he did not want them to join him. This may be because he had already married another young woman, 24-year-old Mitra Belknap, while still being legally married to Clara. Clara, very aware of Holmes' lack of dedication to his family, decided that she would have to support herself and her young son. She learned dressmaking in Concord and set up a shop that would go on to be very successful. In 1892, he added the third floor to his building, telling investors and suppliers he intended on using it as a hotel during the upcoming World's Columbian Exposition. Contemporary accounts reported that Holmes built the hotel to lure tourists visiting the exposition in order to kill them and sell their skeletons to nearby medical schools. Although he did have a history of selling stolen cadavers to medical schools, Holmes had acquired their wares through grave robbing rather than murder. Likewise, there was no evidence that Holmes ever murdered exposition goers on the premises. The Yellow Press labelled the building as Holmes' murder castle, claiming the structure contained secret torture chambers, trapdoors, gas chambers, and a basement crematorium. None of these sensationalised claims were true. Other accounts stated that the hotel was made up of over 100 rooms and laid out like a maze, with doors opening into brick walls, windowless rooms, and dead-end staircases. In reality, the third-floor hotel was moderately sized, largely unremarkable, and uncompleted due to Holmes' disputes with the builders. It did contain some hidden rooms, but they were used for hiding furniture that Holmes had bought on credit and did not intend to pay for. Holmes did not kill an alleged castle victim, Miss Kate Durkee, who turned out to be very much alive. In his confession, Holmes' usual murder method was by suffocation of his victims, including an overdose of chloroform, overexposure to lighter gas fumes, or trapped in an airless vault, but to give some examples. Holmes also claimed that he had used starvation and burning victims alive in his castle. Holmes's hotel was gutted by a fire started by an unknown arsonist shortly after his arrest, but was largely rebuilt and used as a post office until 1938. Besides his infamous murder castle, Holmes had also owned a one-story factory that he claimed was used for glass bending. It is unclear if the factory furnace was ever used for this purpose. It was speculated to have been used to destroy incriminating evidence of Holmes's crimes. Now moving on to the killings. These are broken up into three categories: presumed killings, suspected killings, and the Peitzel murders. So for the presumed killings, his first one was believed to be his mistress, Julia Smith. She was the wife of Dr. Lawrence Icolus Ned Connor, who had moved into Holmes' building and began working at his pharmacy's jewellery counter. After Connor found out about Smith's affair with Holmes, he quit his job and moved away, leaving Smith and their 5-year-old daughter Pearl Connor behind. Smith gained custody of Pearl and remained at the hotel, continuing her relationship with Holmes. Julia and Pearl both disappeared on Christmas Eve of 1891. Holmes initially claimed to acquaintances that Julia had left unexpectedly to visit her dying sister, but then changed his story and said that she had fled from her former husband. Ultimately, Holmes later claimed that Julia had actually died during an abortion. Despite his medical background, Holmes was unlikely to have been experienced in carrying out abortions, and the mortality for such procedures was high at this time. Holmes then claimed to have poisoned Pearl, likely to hide the circumstances of her mother's death. A partial skeleton, possibly of a child around Pearl's age, was found when excavating Holmes' cellar. Pearl's father was a key witness of Holmes' trial in Chicago. Another supposed victim was 23-year-old Emmeline Sigrand, who began working in Holmes' building in May of 1892 and worked for him for 6 months. Holmes reportedly hired Sigrand as a secretary due to her connection to a doctor who peddled a vaccine that allegedly cured alcoholism. Those who saw Sigrand in the weeks before her disappearance noted that she appeared to have lost interest in Holmes and their relationship. Sigrand was last seen in December of 1892. Her parents were informed that she had left to marry a man named Robert Phelps. Authorities hypothesized that she had gotten pregnant by Holmes, possibly being a victim of another failed abortion that Holmes tried to cover up. Her empty luggage trunk was sent back to her mother in Anderson, Indiana. Her skeleton was found by police at the home of a Chicago physician with the help of M.G. Chappell, who admitted having articulated 3 skeletons from H.H.Holmes. In early 1893, a 24-year-old one-time actress named Wilhelmina Minnie Williams moved to Chicago. Holmes claimed to have met her in an employment office, though it was believed that he had actually met her in Boston several years earlier, while he was there going under the alias Harry Gordon. Holmes offered her a job at the hotel as his personal stenographer, and she accepted. Holmes persuaded Williams to transfer the deed to her property in Fort Worth, Texas, to a man named Alexander Bond, who was also another alias of Holmes. In April of 1893, Williams transferred the deed, with Holmes serving as a notary. Holmes later signed the deed over to Peitzel, giving him the alias Benton T. Lyman the following month. Holmes and Williams presented themselves as husband and wife, renting an apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park. Minnie's younger sister, 18-year-old Anna Nanny Williams, came to visit, and on July 5, 1893, she wrote to her aunt that she planned to accompany Brother Harry to Europe. She signed off with the message, "Brother Harry says we need never trouble any more about me, financially or otherwise. He and sister will see to me. I hope our hard days are over." Neither Minnie nor Nanny were ever seen alive again, and Holmes would subsequently use Minnie's name in future scams. Now moving on to the suspected murders. A 68 creditor of Holmes named John Dubreuil died approximately on April 17, 1891 in the castle's drugstore. Dubreuil collapsed and died shortly after Holmes poured a black liquid down his throat, according to a witness. Foul play was not suspected in 1895. It was determined that Dubreuil's life had been insured and that Holmes had profited from his death. In 1891, Emily Van Tassel disappeared after working at Holmes' drugstore. Holmes spoke of her in his confession. In 1897, Tassel's name was cited in a list of suspected victims, and Tassel's mother believed she was a possible victim. Dr. Russler had an office at the castle and went missing in 1892. Holmes mentioned killing Russler in his confession. Dr. Russler had an office in the castle and went missing in 1892. Holmes mentioned killing Russler in his confession. Kitty Kelly, a stenographer for Holmes, also went missing in 1892. John Davis of Greenville, Pennsylvania, went to visit in 1893 for the World's Fair and vanished. In 1920, he was declared legally dead. Harry Walker of Greensburg, Indiana, went missing in November of 1893. He was alleged to have insured his life to Holmes for $20,000 and wrote to his friends that he was working for Holmes in Chicago. Holmes and Peitzel took George Thomas out to a Mississippi swamp on the Tombigbee River in July of 1894, killing him and disposing of his body. Holmes confessed this murder to his second wife. Milford Cole of Baltimore, Maryland, disappeared after receiving a telegram from Holmes to come to Chicago in July of 1894. An additional possible victim was Lucy Burbank. Her bank book was found with human hair in the chimney flue of the castle in 1895. Allegedly, in his confession, Holmes claimed to have killed two people in Lake Country, Illinois, in the 1890s, which was confirmed later that the remains of an unknown man and an unknown woman were found on a farm in 1919, 23 years after his execution. And finally, I move on to the Peitzel murders. Those were the murders that he was found guilty of and sentenced to death over. Holmes met 38-year-old Benjamin Freelone Peitzel early in his life whilst working in the Chemical Bank building in Dearborn Street. Holmes used Peitzel as his right-hand man for several criminal schemes. A district attorney later described Peitzel as Holmes' tool, his creature. In July 1894, Holmes was arrested and briefly jailed for a time on the charge of selling mortgage goods in St. Louis, Missouri. He was promptly bailed out, but whilst in jail, he struck up a conversation with a convicted outlaw named Marion Hedgepeth, who was serving a 25-year sentence. Holmes had concocted a plan to swindle an insurance company out of $10,000 by taking out a policy on himself and then faking his death, something he had done prior. Holmes promised Hedgepeth a $500 commission in exchange for the name of a lawyer who could be trusted. Holmes was directed to a young St. Louis attorney named Jephthah Howe. Howe thought Holmes' scheme was brilliant and agreed to play a part. Nevertheless, Holmes' plan to fake his own death failed when the insurance company became suspicious and refused to pay. Holmes did not press the claim. Instead, he concocted a similar plan with Peitzel. Peitzel agreed to fake his own death so that his wife could collect a $10,000 life insurance policy, which he would split with Holmes and Howe. This scheme, which was to take place in Philadelphia, called for Peitzel to set himself up as an inventor under the name B.F. Perry, and then be killed and disfigured in a lab explosion. Holmes' role was to find an appropriate cadaver to play the role of Peitzel. Instead, Holmes killed Peitzel on September 4, 1894, by knocking him unconscious with chloroform and then setting his body on fire with the use of benzene. In his confession, Holmes implied Peitzel was still alive after the use of the chloroform on him before he set him on fire. However, forensic evidence presented at Holmes' later trial showed chloroform had been administered after Peitzel's death, a fact of which the insurance company was unaware, presumably to stage a suicide to exonerate Holmes should he be charged with murder. Holmes collected the insurance payout on the basis of the genuine Peitzel corpse. Holmes then went to manipulate Peitzel's unsuspecting wife, Carrie Alice Canning, into allowing 3 of her 5 children to be placed in his custody. The 3 children who were placed under Holmes' care were 13-year-old Alice Peitzel, 9-year-old Nellie Peitzel, and 7-year-old Howard Robert Peitzel. Holmes and the 3 Peitzel children travelled throughout the northeastern United States and into Canada. He simultaneously escorted Carrie along a parallel route, all while using various aliases and lying to Carrie about her husband's death, claiming Peitzel was hiding in London, all while lying to her about the true whereabouts of her 3 missing children. Just before entering Canada, they were separated by a few blocks. In an even more atrocious move, Holmes was staying at another location with his current wife, who was unaware of the whole affair. Holmes later confessed to murdering Alice and Nellie on October 24, 1984, by forcing them into a large trunk and locking them inside. He drilled a hole in the lid of the trunk and put one end of the hose through the hole, attaching the other end to a gas line to asphyxiate the girls. Holmes buried their nude bodies in the cellar of his rental house at 16 St. Vincent Street in Toronto. Frank Geyer was a Philadelphia Police Department detective assigned to investigate Holmes and find the 3 missing children. In June 1894, Geyer began tracing Holmes' steps and found the decomposing bodies of the 2 Peitzel girls in the cellar of the Toronto home. Detective Geyer wrote, "The deeper we dug, the more horrible the odour became. And when we reached the depth of 3 feet, we discovered what appeared to be the bone of the forearm of a human being." In Toronto, Geyer discovered unsent letters written by the Peitzel children that Holmes had kept. This information led to further investigations of Holmes' Chicago property and ultimately led Geyer to Indianapolis, where Holmes had rented a home in the Irvington neighborhood. Holmes was reported to have visited a local pharmacy to purchase the drugs which he had used to kill Howard Peitzel. He also visited a repair shop to sharpen the knives he used to chop up the body before he burnt it. The boy's teeth and bones were discovered in the Holmes chimney. Holmes' murder spree finally ended when he was arrested in Boston on November 17, 1894, after being tracked there from Philadelphia by the private Pinkerton National Detective Agency. He was held on an outstanding warrant for horse theft in Texas. Authorities had become more suspicious at this point, as Holmes appeared poised to flee the country in the company of his unsuspecting third wife, Georgiana Yoke. In July of 1895, following the discovery of Alice and Nellie's bodies, Chicago police and reporters became invested in Holmes' building in Englewood, now likely referred to as the Castle. Though many sensational claims were made, no evidence was found which could have convicted Holmes in Chicago, as there was only very circumstantial physical evidence of the castle victims. A piece of human bone, possibly Julia Connor's, was discovered, and the remains of a child, possibly Pearl Connor, as well as a burned gold watch chain and burned dress buttons, apparently belonging to Minnie Williams, and a tuft of human female hair found in the chimney flue. Thus, Holmes would be tried for the murder of the Peitzels in Philadelphia, which had the clearest case for murder. In October 1895, Holmes was put on trial for the murder of Benjamin Peitzel and found guilty and sentenced to death. By then, it was evident Holmes had also murdered the 3 missing Peitzel children. Following his conviction, Holmes confessed to 27 murders in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Toronto, and 6 attempted murders. Holmes was paid $7,500 by the Hearst newspaper in exchange for his confession. Whilst writing his confession in prison, Holmes mentioned how drastically his facial appearance had changed since his imprisonment. On May 7, 1896, Holmes was hanged at the Mayo Mensing prison for the murder of Peitzel. Holmes remained calm and amicable, showing very few signs of fear, anxiety, or depression. Despite this, he asked for his coffin to be contained in concrete and buried 10 feet deep, because he was concerned grave robbers would steal his body and use it for dissection, like he had done to many others himself. Holmes' neck did not break when he was hung. He instead strangled to death slowly, twitching for over 15 minutes before being pronounced dead. This is the complex story of H.H. Holmes and his murder castle. A lot of the story has been sensationalised, so picking apart facts and fiction from the story has been difficult. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.